Alright, Greg, for this video, number 4 here, I'm going to show you how to trim a sample here after you've sampled into memory here on the SP-12 or 1200. So what I've done, I've sampled a 2.5 second sound into pad D8, which I think is the equivalent to bank 1.8 on the SP-12. So on the other videos, I've been referring to the banks, based on the banks for the SP-1200, which goes D, C, B, A. But I believe it on the SP-12 now, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4. So sorry for the confusion in the other videos. So anyway, I have a sound sampled into D8 right here. So we're bank D8, which is equivalent to 1.8 on SP-12. So I'm going to hit it. Okay. So, but anyway, let's say, so that's a full 2.5 second sample. Now let's just let's say that we want to trim this smaller, or maybe there's a kick drum or snare drum that you want to dig out and just save the sample itself. To do this, you're going to go to Setup. Okay, and if you look here, there's setting 19. It's a loop truncate. Okay, 19. So here we're gonna punch in 19. 1, 9. Okay. So now the first thing we need to do is assign the pad that has the sample we want to truncate. And so since I'm on bank D, I'm gonna hit pad 8. It plays the sample when you do it. That's okay. So there, it's set to D8 now. So I'm going to hit Enter. And it says Make Truncation Permanent. Okay, what did I do wrong here? Let's do this again. Setup 1, 9, 8. Enter. Okay. I accidentally hit Enter twice. That it shouldn't have said. It shouldn't have taken me to that other screen. This is what it looks like after you enter the loop truncate mode. This first line with S equals 000 and E equals 65090. What that means is the start is at sample 0, and the end is on sample 65090. So the sample rate on these devices is around, it's like 26,000 samples a second. Maybe it's a little bit off that. But if you take a 26,000 or 27,000 times 2, I think you get. I don't have the math in front of me, but I think this is saying the number of samples. So this represents like all the samples in like a 2.5 second sample. You can see here the pad is D8. This L stands for loop, and I'll explain what that means more in a second. Right now that says none. So essentially, what you're going to do is when you trim the start endpoints, like say if you wanted to start more in the middle, you'd adjust this S to be like, say, like 30,000, and maybe you want to trim the end back, so maybe the end goes back closer to like 40,000 or something like that. After you get the settings right, you'll play the sample back until you get it the way you want, and then you'll eventually commit, and you'll hit Enter, and it'll ask you, are you sure you want to do this? Because the data will be thrown away, and then you hit yes or no. So to change the start and end trim points, okay, here we're going to be using the sliders, slider 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and so essentially slider 1 and 2 are for the start, and slider 3 and 4 are for the end. And what it is like the slider 1 ends up being like a large granularity slider, so you can slide. It steps through the numbers, very like large quantity numbers, and then the second one is like a fine tuning for like very making very fine changes to the number of samples to the start point, and the same for the end. So this slider will adjust the endpoints in very large increments, and the 4 is for the changing the end, the end fine tuning in small increments. Okay, so I'm gonna start playing with sliders 1 and 2, and you can see. I'll show you what it looks like in the screen. So you can see the screen here. It started by default. It starts off at like 0 for the start, and like 65,000 for the end. Now, one thing to note here that's problematic on this SP-1200 and needs to be, and which actually means that the unit needs to be serviced a little bit more, and I think is also kind of the case on the SP-12, but I'm not sure if it's as bad on the SP-12, is these sliders here are like kind of old and are starting to not work as well. They might be able to be cleaned a little bit more, but the problem is once in a while you'll see the sliders kind of jump around. So it's supposed to be here at 0. If I just wiggle this around just a little bit, it'll start to kind of jump around, and the problem is because of that, sometimes it'll update super fast and you won't even see it. But when I'm trying to play the sample back, sometimes it causes the sample to not play back correctly, because these sliders sometimes are kind of glitchy and jumping around. You know, like a new device or a device that has brand new sliders in there, that won't happen. But I've been noticing that quite a bit on this SP-1200. See, it just jumped. I didn't even change the slider, and it went from 0 to 2070, and I didn't even do anything. And it might jump back to 0 again. Now that okay. There, I touched it just a little bit. It's really kind of sensitive, especially at the bottom of the range. So you know, I think there was a little bit of that going on with the SP-12, but I don't think it was as bad as the 1200. And so I think it might be a wise decision at some point to buy new sliders for both units, and I could solder at some point. I could probably solder them in just so we have perfectly working units. But anyway. So that said, I'm going to start adjusting slider 1 and 2 here, and so you can see when I'm adjusting slider 1, you can see how the increments are goes up from essentially 0, and I can go up to about 62,000, and then if I use the slider number 2 from there, slider number 2 goes in finer increments. So it starts at 62,000. You see it's adding in much smaller increments. So it looks like it goes maybe up to maximum like 3,000 or something like that. So if I bring slider 1 all the way down, so it starts at 0, and then only push up slider 2, yeah, it looks like it goes to about 5,000 here. Well, now it's jumping around a little bit. Now it says 7,000. Anyway, it's much finer increments. But again, they're kind of sticky, so it's a little bit annoying. So anyway, if I play it back, okay. See, it's cutting out a little bit, and that's because these values are jumping around. So this might get a little tricky, but the main thing here is I just want you to understand how the sample theoretically is supposed to be trimmed. The playback is a little jumpy on this right now. Yeah, see, I'm not moving it, and see, it just jumped from 2,000 to 4,000. When it's jumping around like that, it causes it causes the playback to actually cut out, and so you're not, when you play back the sample to try to hear how it's been trimmed, you're not actually hearing the true the true trim settings, which is okay. That's actually what it should sound like, I think, because it's playing to the end. Now see, now it cut out. And I think these sliders get a little bit better when we adjust them closer to the middle. I think they're junkier towards the extremes, like on the bottom. So I'm gonna adjust the start to some place closer to the middle, and then play it back. Okay, so now I've adjusted. Now at the same time, now sliders 3 and 4 do the same thing, but it's for the end. And so again, with the slider 3 being like the large granularity and 4 being the fine granularity. And so now you'll see the 65,000 start going backwards. So I'm moving 3 now. You can see it's going adjusting backwards, and now I'll use the fine trim on the number 4, a little smaller increment. Okay, so now I'll play it back. Okay, so essentially that's what you do. And so now if I want to zero everything back out, I'm gonna set S to 0. So I pull both of these all the way down. See, that sets it to 0, and then you put 3 and 4 all the way up. That's kind of the default position. And see how, oops. Again, the 1 and 2 are a little sticky, so it's hard. It doesn't always go to 0 correctly, but essentially it should read 0, and then if you have a 2.5 second sample, if the sample is longer than 2.5 or shorter than 2.5 seconds, obviously that end number is going to be smaller. But that's the default way you start editing. So when you go into the on the SP-1200s, when you go into trim sample mode, the first thing you want to do is slide 1 and 2 all the way down, and 3 and 4 all the way up. Okay, so and then let's say we get the sample the way we wanted it. Okay, so let's say we like it just the way it is right here, because I don't want to trim the sample, because I want to show another example of using the same sample here, so without destroying it. But anyway, if this is the way we want it, we'll have it at 00. So I can get it 006590. I'm going to hit enter, and then it's going to say make truncation permanent, yes, no. So in this case, I'm not actually truncating it, but in most cases you actually would be truncating it and throwing stuff away. So the sample should be the same after I do this, but anyway, it says, do you want to make it permanent? And then you just click yes, boom, and then it's done. Now I just want to show you another setting that's kind of interesting to the SP-1200 in that loop truncate mode. And that's the loop function, which is part of that loop/truncate. So I'm going to go back to 19. I'm still in setup mode here, right? So it says setup function, so I'm going to go back to 19, 1, 9. I'm going to click my pad again, which is my D8. That's D8, and I click enter. Okay, so it goes back. I'm back to those default settings here and here. Now the other thing we didn't talk about is this L, and that stands for loop, and right now it's saying none. Well, you control the loop setting with sliders 5 and 6, and it's really similar to the way the other ones for start and end work, as in this is a large granularity and this is a small granularity setting. And what this does is when it's none, there's no loop at the end. But a clever little thing they did, when memory was really rare in the good old days, is they made it so if you needed to extend the length of the sample or add some ambience to it to make it sound longer or something like that, it has a little loop function, and you can kind of cause the sample it plays the sample the first time all the way through, but then the loop function, what it'll do is it'll loop this little snippet that you create at the end with this sort of built-in decay rate. And so you have to kind of experiment with it. But actually you can kind of cause sometimes a sample to have a little, it's kind of an effect that's kind of unique to these units. And so it'll be good to kind of hear what that sounds like. So first, there's the default sample. So I'm going to start using sliders 5 and 6 to kind of adjust that loops setting, and I think it'll be pretty apparent on what it does. So now it's saying loop about starting at about 8,000 samples. So now if I hit it, so it loops. I think what it does is it loops a piece, so it's a small piece, only 8,000 samples, so that if you keep making this smaller, it should start looping. I believe it loops faster. So let me do it. I just changed it to 4,000. Or if I go down all the way to and use the super fine one, so it's really small, like 450. This should be really fast. Yeah, see, it gets really fast. And you can hear at the end though. You could hear that time the shape of the decay rate. So it plays the loop for like a certain amount of time and decay. It's built in. You can't change that. It's fixed. But again, some of the sounds of people programming on the SP-12 or 1200, that's kind of that becomes part of the sound. So I think it'll be important to kind of experiment with that. So I'm gonna keep adjusting this to see if I can get kind of a cool sound with this. See, that's max. Right now I have 5 at 0 and 6 max. You can see it, the fine tuning on the loop goes to 3150 here. Okay, so now I'm going to start extending it. I'm going to start extending it with 5. Let's try that. Okay, so that was just kind of random. It kind of there's kind of looping right off the one on the snare. But sometimes people use it to just get kind of like a reverb trail effect to kind of extend the sound of the sample to so it fits, like, so it loops a little nicer, like in a measure. I've heard people use all sorts of kind of cool creative ways with it. See that one's kind of looping strange. It was cutting in and out a couple times there because, again, the issue with the sliders on 1 through 4, with them being glitchy, and that's if it's not playing back correctly, that's probably what's going on. So now I've made it small again. It's pretty fast. Let's try one more. So then when you're done with that, again, if I wanted to commit this, I'd hit enter and just say make truncation permanent. In this case, I'm just going to say no because I want to keep the sample loaded. And that's that, and then exit setup.